Is it a bad thing? Is it a bad thing to be able to enhance the parts of reality that you're wanting to enhance because you want more of that? Then if not, don't use Photoshop. If not, don't use any color correction on your TV. If not, don't EQ your stereos and stuff like that. And there's a purist aspect to it, and there's a entertainment or an enjoyment aspect of life that comes out of tweaking a little bit of how you're being presented things, I suppose.
Whoa, welcome to Gigabytes. We're going to talk about sports today and live entertainment and experiential design firms.
I like how we skipped Killa and Mega and went straight to Gigabytes.
Absolutely. You just got to go straight to gigs because this is going to be multi-gig file because we're going to talk about a lot of stuff. But I wanted to start with the sports and live entertainment market because I think it's a really fascinating market that we've been focusing on now for a little over 18 months and learned a lot by working with some of our early partners. But the part I really want to focus on is what experiences do fans want now that we've kind of learned, and what are the limitations or the ways that we can actually provide those experiences for fans? Because there's been a lot of exciting news recently about sports and live entertainment. Obviously with streaming broadcasts, doing spatial broadcasts, all these kinds of things are coming to light now, which is awesome. As a sports fan, I'm super excited about that.
Now, as in this is March 1st.
This is March 1st, so by the time this releases, I'm sure there's like 100 new updates that are happening in the sports world. But I think the part I really want to focus on first is in venue, and then we can talk about out of venue. So in venue, right? One of our main focuses we've been trying to do is how do we augment the fan experience from somebody who is sitting in a seat watching a game anywhere in the venue to feel as close to the players as possible, the action that's happening as possible. So could you just briefly kind of talk about like what we're doing today with embodied sound, but what we're learning is the thing that fans want, but what are the kind of the limitations of how to actually do that?
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I mean, the whole harboring the date is probably gonna be relevant, especially it's a weird time right now. It's moving so fast that within weeks things will change. So I feel like, just reiterating every single time. It's March 1st right now. By the time this comes out, it might be changed a little bit. So right now, the whole idea about putting the courtside, let's say courtside experience, which is the target that we're trying to put the courtside experience everywhere in the venue, is right now limited by two things. One, the venues were not designed to have individual seat infrastructure everywhere, so that's one. And then second, the signals that were captured are not designed for reproduction at this level. They were designed for broadcast for your TV, for a small TV, right? With your small speakers that are built into the TV. They're not designed for high-end, home theaters or something like that. Because there's kind of no reason. If you want that experience, you have to buy a ticket and you go into the venue. And so there's always been this kind of divide versus presence of the event, being present at an event versus experiencing that presence at home. And so the one thing that we're trying to do as the step towards that is using embodied sound and the ability to be able to recreate the entire frequency range, so you can both feel and hear the entirety of the sound spectrum, so that way it's a visceral, real experience. It feels more like you're present there at watching a sound event or watching an event. And putting that in different seats that aren't as close to courtside, and just seeing if we can extend that courtside range, right? The first couple rows is kind of where you get that courtside experience. And even if you're one or two steps behind, you still kind of get that whole, you can hear them running back and forth across the court, and seeing how far back we can really, push that experience, so that way people up in the nosebleeds or even just under or at the suites that are kind of disassociated with the court can still feel that. And that's where we ran into these first two problems, which is the infrastructure is not ready for individual seat, amplification, and then the signal itself is not the ideal signal that we need to reproduce at the seat level.
So, and also to kind of define like the two ways right now we've noticed is the best way to enjoy these sports experiences inside of the venue is one, we've done seating like you presented, where we put our device on the back of a seat, turn the seat into the source of sound. Now you can hear and feel in the comfort of your seat. I think that works great in a suite level, but I think the other thing we've recently done that has a lot of value to it is actually just putting flooring down, because especially in a lot of sporting events, the sound events actually happen from the ground. So whether it be a basketball game, obviously with the dribbles and the sneaker squeaks, that's something that's emanating from the ground itself. But even in hockey, you're talking about the ice and the skates and everything that's also happening directly on the ice. So by doing flooring, we're kind of taking that court and then just replacing it somewhere else where you as a fan are standing on top of it. And I think that's another interesting kind of use case as we tried both of them of what is more realistic or lifelike to take those elements that are happening and then presenting it to a fan and what makes them feel more connected. I think that's an interesting thing we've also kind of explored recently.
Yeah, the floor was amazing. Amazing in the sense of how well it works. The floor is kind of a brainchild between Vincent Zhang. Shout out to our product designer, very talented Vincent Zhang. He was originally making the flooring for our CES demo pod, and then as we were testing elements, we had the flooring, we had the seats with 2 resin X's embedded in each side for stereo left and right, and then we had panels, wall panels, metal wall panels. So we had wooden floors, fiberglass chairs, and metal wall panels, all together, mixed all together, and each one, was calibrated to the same frequency response, and so it was a really cool experience having each one be independent from each other and knowing what the effectiveness is. But the floors were almost like the most realistic.
Yep.
And also because it was such a large panel, it was able to reproduce the wave that would be like a lower frequency wave, which is really cool, which is usually an issue with some of these chaotically emanating sound reproduction devices. And because of that, the flooring then now, because of the way we're capturing it as well, allows it to be a really realistic reproduction of what's happening on the court. Yep. By having a microphone by the court, we're able to capture the sounds that are happening at the court, reproducing them through the floor. It's almost, I don't know if it's better, but it's almost better than having like the vibration capturing devices underneath the court itself.
Yeah.
And then reproducing that over here because you get so much more detail and nuance and what's it called? The higher frequency harmonics that have come from the shoe squeaks and the ball bouncing. Yep. It now gets reproduced through the floor. So it's almost a better experience, which is counterintuitive when you think about it. But yeah, surprise. It was a total surprise that it works that well, and that's what you get for being there and trying it out and just saying forget it and let's see what comes out of this, and these are the happy accidents that come out of it. Yeah, no, I think that's been the part that I've been so excited about is also talking with fans and hearing what elements of the game do they want to enjoy, what they don't want to enjoy. Obviously, sports fans all want to hear what the players are talking about. That's a different conversation because that's something that the organizers of the sports, the Player Association, they get to define that because those are the players, and sometimes what they say is something that fans don't want to hear, but also that is something that if you're sitting courtside, you're getting no matter what. So I think that's kind of an interesting conversation to be had is like, those sound events are still being enjoyed inside of the venue. I do agree that should not leave the venue, but if you are allowing more fans inside of that venue to be connected to it, I do think that gives a more visceral experience to the action that's happening, because that conversations, those moments, those fouls, those like good calls, bad calls, like all those elements are what makes that sport so real. And as a true fan, like that's what you want. But I do get that like leagues have to protect themselves from and the players do it from themselves sometimes. And I guess to quell everybody's concerns, that's an easy problem to solve. It's not a difficult thing to say, oh, we're gonna lose. No, it's if you separate the things into the ball dribble, the player vocals, and the shoe squeaks, then we can recreate which one of those experiences you want afterwards. Yep. Without saying too much. Yeah, no, and I think to that part actually that goes into a question I did have for you is right now when you think about a basketball game, you think of what broadcast captures, right? It's like everything gets mushed into one file because naturally a mic is going to pick up anything that's happening in that venue from the action that's happening in the court. But in a basketball game, for example, there's also music that's blasting. There's the crowd cheers that are happening. All of that's getting picked up by the mic. It's all getting put into one file, and then that one file is the thing that gets reproduced out to a certain extent, right? So what's the issue with that, right? Because now that we're hearing and feeling it, we've learned a lot about like how do we have to think about that problem. That's a very good way to put it. And this is getting a little philosophical because this is the as you're taking a shower and you're kind of thinking about, okay, how did we get here, and then where should we have gone? We got to this point because we were trying to emulate how the ear works. The ear has a little vibrating membrane, and the membrane then converts itself into signals, again, path along a pathway that then goes to the brain. Your brain interprets it. But if you stop there, then you're not really having a microphone system that works like how our brain interprets the different signals. If I look at a door closing, I'm not hearing all the other details and the background radiation of the AC or whatever. I'm just focusing on the door as it closes. And same thing as the ball. If I'm looking from maybe 15 rows back, I'm looking for the ball to hit the floor and then associating the sounds with that activity. And I'm not listening to people cheering from the side. I'm not listening to the PA going up. I'm not listening to people, the announcers talking. I'm not listening to the other team. I'm looking for the specific action I have. And your brain has this natural ability to be able to focus in on some of those elements and not just listen to everything all at once, which is what microphones are, but the ability to be able to pick out individual sources or individual things that are happening out there. So a system that doesn't take into account picking out an individual item or a thing and being able to separate that from the cacophony of the entire signal that's happening in that space is going to then just de facto you're just kind of throwing someone in without any context.
A lot of noise. Just a lot of noise.
It's just a lot of noise.
Not a lot of information, but a lot of noise.
Yeah, it's put it this way, like not shit on broadcast because it's a very tough job and it's a very difficult ability to be in there, but you're broadcasting noise with the happy accident that something else is happening to cut through the noise instead of trying to create a sense of presence or experience for the actual thing. Don't come after me. Sorry.
Well, I mean, the reality is it's like, if the ultimate goal, which we've discussed quite a bit, is you as a fan want to feel like the player in the game. Like the ultimate perception is, and why we call this embodied sound, is we want to embody another person's or another perspective, another experience, and live that moment. Right. And if I'm watching a basketball game and I want to live the moment of my favorite athlete, as of right now today, there are visual mechanisms to allow you to get that perspective, or at least the perspective of being around those players and all that. But auditorily, just due to existing ways you can capture the sound, the existing ways that the signal is then presented in reproduction, and through that entire kind of process, the goal we have for a fan, there's a lot you have to solve through that audio signal chain. It's not as easy as you have a mechanism you can hear and feel, and you just follow the player, and now you can understand their perspective.
Yeah,
we have to be able to stitch together that person's perspective of that moment and present it to the fan.
Which I guess brings up the topic of when you Apple Vision Pro again, right? It's not actually showing you a pass-through. It's showing you what it's picking up from pass-through and then reconstructing the pass-through based on how to shift up from the lenses, how to compensate for the black glass in front. So you're bringing up the question of if you're re-stitching reality back together from sensors that are picking up reality, is it truly reality, or are you, or is it better than reality because now you're able to get more than you can do? And that's essentially what a hearing aid is. That's what glasses are. That's what people who have sensory deficits compensate by using other sensory modes to be able to reinforce it. So, is it a bad thing? Is it a bad thing to be able to enhance the parts of reality that you're wanting to enhance because you want more of that? Then if not, don't use Photoshop. If not, don't use any color correction on your TV. If not, don't EQ your stereos and stuff like that. And there's a purist aspect to it, and there's a entertainment or an enjoyment aspect of life that comes out of tweaking a little bit of how you're being presented things, I suppose.
So on that vein, so let's go back to the example of me as a fan. I'm sitting in a suite. I want to feel like I'm LeBron James. Let's get an example. LeBron was just playing against the Clippers, Lakers. LeBron had a phenomenal game. They ended up winning it. The reason why that's a big game is because it's always the Battle of LA, because it's two LA teams. And that game was very exciting. There was a lot of crazy shots, all these kinds of moments. But at the very end, LeBron was able to really drive the team, and they got a win. Me as watching that, and I was able to watch that just on TV. Cool. I got to watch that. I got to see the moments and all that. It was exciting, but that's a very different thing of...
But you weren't there.
I wasn't there, and not only was I not there, I was not in the perspective of the person who was in the midst of it. Like, I want to feel like I am in the middle of that moment to allow my team to win versus me spectating my team to win.
I see, yeah.
And if that's the goal I have as a fan, and if I want to be able to feel like I am LeBron James in a game... and going back into
the presence of LeBron James.
Obviously, in the presence of LeBron James, but you're talking about stitching that reality together. Like realistically, what would that require on the signal side so you can stitch together the perspective of that athlete
feeling like you're there?
Yeah, in that moment.
We have to talk about how do what technology is required to be able to simulate a piece or a component of reality. And we have to talk about other senses.
Yeah.
We have to talk about multimodality. We have to talk about these other concepts that are usually situated for heavy simulation, right? And traditionally they have been, right? The whole idea of a volumetric video to be able to surround you and immerse you into a false environment that also has depth perception in that type of thing, requires huge rendering farms because there's a lot of pixels to be able to convince your eye and your brain that that is a real thing and not just a pixel display. You have to have, of course, this immersive spatial audio to be able to give you sounds that are coming from different directions, because if you're looking at a direction and there's an enemy approaching you from that direction, you're not facing that direction, you have to have something call your attention. That's why hearing is involved. If something then impacts you as a person, say you get shoved by LeBron James in that type of environment, you need some sort of haptic or tactile or force feedback to be able to inform your body that a contact has happened, right? A little bit or a lot. There's some debate about how much is needed for realism, but at this point, you need something, right?
Yep.
And then also, you need that smell of sweat to be able to come through, and then maybe if you're lucky enough to get a taste of it or something.
Terrible.
Those may or may not be necessary. But the point being is that the more senses are engaged, also the quality of how those senses are engaged are the things that are important. So either you have to have a multi-sensory sensor tower that's just literally there capturing it, or you have to virtualize that device. And again, this device needs visual, tactile force feedback. It needs auditory and dimensional auditory and dimensional video and dimensional force feedback. It's all dimensional of each one of these things. It's not just here's a sensor that when you press it, you can get force feedback, or here's a microphone that when you talk near it, it sound. It's something that is listening to all directions and all sides, because that's how you would be if you were there, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is you can't put that in the middle of the court.
Yep.
So how the heck does somebody grab that stuff from afar? Well, you have to, like I said earlier, you have to virtualize that capture device that should be in the middle of the court by basically resynthesizing elements that are happening around of it, and then maneuvering your virtual input device so that way we can place you at different areas around the court, so that way we can impress upon you that it's as if you were there at that point in the court.
All right, so let me make sure I'm taking that for the people listening in a more simple term. Pretty much what you're saying is we need to turn the real world into a video game in essence, because in a video game setup, you can virtualize and control every element individually, versus in the real world, it's getting captured in one snapshot.
I would say that's our way of doing it.
Yeah.
Because being in our generation, I guess, we're young enough that the video game world is easy enough to jump into, and it's familiar for us to be able to associate things to that. I guess it doesn't necessarily need to be a video game environment, but that's our easiest way to be able to understand it, is saying that, if we, in a video game creation, you are dealing with objects in the game that can all emit from their position to you as the observer, and you can change your observer position, and that's how you navigate through a video game, right? And then there's things that happen in the video game world that happen to you, the observer. And so, if we want to have that type of flexibility in the real world, you have to map the real world to how it can be manipulated like a video game. Yeah.
Interesting. So there's a lot of work to do to kind of build that next generation of fan experiences, because I think this perfectly kind of leads into what happens outside of the venue. So obviously what we're talking about is there's ways to augment and build the experience inside of a sports venue, and what you can do for a fan, and how to make them feel embodied in that moment and more tied to that moment and make it more exhilarating, which I think is very important, because that's what's going to get people to want to go to a venue. Otherwise, if it's that good of an experience outside of a venue, why would people go to a venue, right? But I think that opens the door for the secondary conversation, which is where the world of streaming is going now, because and new formats of streaming, which is really interesting, seeing that, for example, ESPN, TNT, Fox deciding to work together to make a streaming. I think that kind of unification is going to allow for standardization and really good next generation content, because they can share resources to make those productions. I think the other part that's very interesting is like the MLS announcing that all of their playoffs are going to be showed in Vision Pro and Spatial.
Awesome.
Which I think is fantastic, and I'm excited to see what does that production feel like.
But
that kind of opens the door, is like we're now looking looking at new ways that we can experience. We're getting away from linear. We're getting away from you have one choice and one choice only, to even in streaming, and what you can do in Amazon is I can choose different camera angles. I can choose different commentators. Like I can personalize to me how I want to enjoy that content experience at home.
Yeah.
But the next conversation is obviously we can't avoid Vision Pro, spatial, all these things that people are trying to do. Even what Meta has been doing for a while now. Obviously, I'm not like with courtside experiences. Why can or cannot do that with audio today to create the same thing that you can do visually? Because that's I feel like the part that we always in creating experiences think of audio as secondary versus as a primary with visual. So where's the kind of friction point existing today?
I think the thing my opinion here, the great killer here was channels. The channel-based workflow from back when we were starting to record onto, let's see here, let's see how far back we should go. The vinyl, right? The vinyl. You're literally doing it, scratching the waveform into a disc, and then playing back the waveform on a mono speaker. Eventually, they figured out how to be able to do stereo and the thing, and be able to do that. And then, of course, but everything was always based off of channel. You scratch the one thing in a channel, two things in a channel. Okay, mix different things into channels and put it into a channel. Great. A lot of flexibility there, because you can have multiple channels and subchannels. But at some point, we're at this point, not some point, it's at this point that we have exceeded the amount of logical channels that makes sense for a human brain to be able to deal with. It's no longer this binary classical computing mode that we're used to, that traditional computation has grown up in, and that thinking of things logically in that same vein that has now expired. If you want to have more flexibility than otherwise having 150 channels around you, and then someone's trying to mix 150 channels down to buses, but then you're still grouping and affecting all of those channels from how a human can be able to affect them. It's not saying that humans have no responsibility or role here. Absolutely, and there's still going to be the creative component of this, and in fact, it's more akin to how like spell check and how what's it called, like templates. I think have helped human creativity move faster.
Absolutely.
I think this is going to be the same thing, where you shouldn't have a human trying to keep track of all the different channels, of all the different places, of all the different spaces each one of these things are, and then try to be able to figure out how to numerically assign those. But that's how every single desk as in like a mixing board, every single DAW or digital audio workstation is all channel based. Everything is channel based, and you have to have one microphone for one channel and one discrete thing for each one, or you have to sum them and then put it, and then you have to still manually do every single thing of it. And at the rate of how much we want to be able to have this perspective changing and what do we call this? The like you said, flexibility and personalization. There's no way that you're going to allow somebody to be able to pick one of 75 channels or 150 channels to be able to choose that's the perspective you want. It's going to have to be more complex, more nuanced than that. I want to hear more of this. I want to hear more of that. I want to hear these people talk. I want to hear those people talk. I want to hear when this happens. There's going to be much more situational awareness that a computer needs to have in order to help deliver the experience that the consumer is going to want.
So, I mean, I think that goes into an interesting point where, obviously now with
opinion,
of course. I mean, all these are our opinions of where we think things are going. But I think the interesting part with like artificial intelligence and how that applies to future streaming and all these things is, as you brought up, I think it opens the door for higher quality of productions to happen with the same teams that are doing it, and the teams that are doing it to focus on the critical task of creativity of what that experience can be versus how to do it.
Right.
Because I think the limitation right now, especially around if you're going to make a spatial experience, what you said, like with the perspective changing and all that, is you also have to define. I'm thinking on like a search engine query is like you have to redefine how you're defining the question of an experience, like you said, where it's like defining an action versus the how to get to that action. And then the workflow of how that works, I think is very important, because if you think about it, it's like what you said, it's like all these channels and somebody knowing the nuance of doing that, and somebody says, I want to hear this part of the game better or this action better.
Yeah, you have to translate through how to get through the channels to get that
things.
Effect. Yeah.
And for me, that is a natural area where things like artificial intelligence can allow us to be a lot more flexible there, because if you're trying to make these bigger productions at the scale that right now where sports entertainment is, it's top peak. Like it's growing so fast right now.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be an interesting hurdle that we're going to hit when it comes to these experiences, both in venue and out of venue, is how can they be designed if people have to do this many manual tasks to create it.
Right. And but it also will hold them back if you're tasked with trying to create that sonic experience for these people, and you have 100,000 people all asking for different things at the same time. It all comes from one source, and so that one source is master, that one source is law. If you try to change it, you're changing it for everybody, and not everybody wants that same change that you want. It might be, from an audio engineering perspective, excellent. But from an experiential perspective, it may not be. And so there's always going to be this tug of war that I think it's been around for forever. Ever since cable TV has been around, people have always wanted to be able to change it and make different nuances and make different requests. And so that's why obviously TVs have had more and more ability to be able to have processing for the visual, more and more of the home theater systems and sound bars and all these other accessories for that home watching experience have gotten better and better because people want to have their unique experience for whatever the price point and budget can have.
Yeah, and I think that perfectly leads into the next thing I'm interested to kind of hear your thoughts are, which is why it's so important to build specifically audio solutions in the trenches with those that are actually dealing with these things, because I think that's the nuances that gets left out a lot in the conversations around building these future of immersive experiences. Is I think visual workflows are very dominant. People understand the workflows. A lot of people that are creating the solutions for them have come from those industries. But on the audio side, there's an argument to be had around the lack of innovation there. And at least the thing that I've seen as a common take is not enough people are kind of going in the trenches to understand what are the workflows today to build for those experiences. And you have to solve it at square one. You can't solve it in the middle, and assume that the end result,
at the end,
and just assume that it's going to be the experience that is being pitched or derived. And I've learned that directly from you because I've tried to pitch those ideas, and you're like, nope, you got to go all the way over here.
Come on,
to solve it through. So I guess just kind of hear your take, like you've come from that industry, and what's your kind of thoughts as to like why you kind of have to look at problem solving in audio from the beginning all the way through, not just jump out one part.
Yeah, I think there's two things here. Maybe we'll go one at a time.
Yeah.
First to specify where I'm coming from, and by consequence where our R&D team is coming from, is I come from studio. I come from trying to amplify and clarify every single individual element that then later I can mix down into this ideal sonic experience I want the user to have. That means I need a reliable mode of reproduction, so that way I can produce the content to be reproduced correctly in a myriad of different reproduction pathways. Hence why we came up with embodied sound first. And of course, now we can move backwards down the line as we're dealing with more and more signals that are not ideal. In a recording system, a recording studio, you're dealing with an ideal environment. You have ideal recording equipment. It's all balanced cables, short runs, and you're using with high-end preamp microphones that are able to get all sorts of different nuances. That's great. Basketball game's not that. Basketball game, you have it's a hostile environment. There's a PA blaring while you're trying to delicately pick up little squeaks and stuff up in there, and there's boom, boom, boom from the hip hop and it's great. It's definitely like all the antithesis of things you'd want in like a carefully constructed environment. So trying to then have that same workflow and that way does not make sense. So that's kind of where our approach comes from, which I think why that now makes a little sense of how we're approaching it this way. This other thing to talk about was it's a little bit of a bigger question of how that applies across a myriad of different things. And I'm forgetting what you said at this point. What's the second thing you asked?
It's just why it's so important to build workflows with what the audience is on the
field. That's right. Okay, so the second thing that you brought up, which is why is it so important to be in the field in order to have practical innovation? That's a huge topic of conversation, not only for sound industry but for many industries, and that's the idea of research, development, and then applied research and development, and then commercialized research and development, which are three very different things. Things that go to NASA missions and military and other crazy things that do not reach a commercial level of population are things that should and are researched at a very high level. Theoretical research, things that help us understand where we come from, help us understand the universe, help us understand space and space-time. There are a lot of things that are theoretical science that will never see a will never materialize in a commercial world, and that's okay. There are some things that are applied research, which is we will research this theory and then we have to apply it in the actual field where we think it has some benefits. Vaccines are a great example of this, right? And then there's commercial research, which is, hey, people seem to want this feature. How can we figure out a way to do that? And that's kind of like the engineering mindset of being able to commercialize some research into something that's has commercial value. Between those three, I think from a personal perspective, it's always relevant to have a boots on the ground to see how that workflow actually materializes. If you have people in a room making decisions and then people on the ground saying there's a disconnect with how you see it versus how it actually is, then even if you may get there, you're going to lose time, energy, resources, and not have a full understanding of the situation and the nuances involved to make that decision. If you don't see the effects of it happening. I think military hierarchy is probably the most affected by something like that, right? If the boots on the ground are saying, hey, this is a situation, but the generals in somewhere else are saying, let's make this decision without understanding the situation on the ground, then you have a potentially catastrophic type of situation. And that, I don't think any industry is immune from that. But something that I guess this might be like an anti-capitalistic route, but in pursuit of efficiency, trying to eliminate some or all of those feedback routes, so it's kind of more of a one direction communication, makes things more efficient, but at the same time you start losing some of those routes. Granted, a lot of industries are pretty mature and can exist with that. Audio is definitely one of those industries that is a very mature industry, and once somebody figures out how to do something one way, it just makes sense for everybody to copy it and everyone to just do it. But that also means that those same industries are ripe for something new to come out of nowhere and potentially take everybody by surprise. And if you're boots on the ground,
you learn that. You
might have seen it coming.
Yeah. No, I think that's interesting because we get asked the question quite a lot where it's like,
why us?
No, not even why us, but like what are the problems in audio, right?
Yeah.
And if you really wanted me to, I could write you just ridiculous lists of just problems, because the more and more I've met folks
from an outsider, how do you see issues on audio?
The way I see it is that it's one of those industries which is so overlooked due to the fact that people accept where it is at. There's a status quo. Yeah. And I think that's the most dangerous thing in innovation. It's a conversation I always have with people where it's like people are so excited about visual forms and mixed reality and all these things. And then I ask them about what are their thoughts on audio today. And it's like, oh, we have spatial audio. I'm like, so you're okay with that being where it's at and that's never going to get better? Yeah. And their answer is, I didn't really thought about it that way. I'm like, well, you're thinking about it on the visual side that way. You should probably think about it that with your other senses. So for me, I think the part that's very interesting is that once you go into the nuance of what is a good experience, you start identifying the audio problems. But if you have a conversation around what is acceptable today, there's not a lot of audio problems. So that's the way I kind of look at the market, where there's a I can understand the argument around the innovation and why big companies exist and why there's not that much movement here, but I can also understand the other side of it where it's like those big organizations have also caused these massive micro problems because they're forcing a certain mechanism, which is not the right way to actually right or wrong is not the right approach, but maybe not the most efficient way based off where the rest of the market is moving to build that way. We're just kind of so slow moving that it's not going to.
I would say all industries have also, I don't know about all, and that's maybe an oversimplification of it, but at least several industries have changed so that they're not all specialized. I think we had an era in industrialization where after people like Ford and stuff like that had kind of encroached it, and then niche opportunities then were presented, right? By like, for example, Ford, and then other automakers came and said, I could do this part better, I can do this part better, I can do this part. Then we entered an era of specialization, which is the generalists couldn't afford to keep up with people this niche serving this niche audience better than the generalists could serve that same niche audience. Yeah. So then everyone lost a little bit of those niche audiences from the generalists. And weirdly enough, I feel like things are moving so fast right now that the niche specialists can't keep up with other areas that are now being approached by other aspects of it. Like even like, and I get why visual has been such a heated topic for so long. It's the largest cortex in the brain, and that's how we get most of our information. So totally get it. But it also helps the visual side helps inform the other senses.
Yep.
It helps you know that there's something to smell and there's something to taste and there's something for this or whatever, right? And also it helps you know that there's something to focus on. So if all the audio companies today are not necessarily looking at visual aids or visual elements of it or visual interaction modes, then this is the time with the rise of multimodality through AI, even though we were researching that a long time ago. But this era of multimodality that we're entering is going to blindside every single company because no one industry is safe from how the influence of other industries are going to impact the original source material here.
Got it. So let's end this episode today with a closing
It's very philosophical.
This is very philosophical. I mean, we started with like I want to just enjoy a sporting event to like. This is
why, it's that's what I'm talking about. Sports is not immune from the Vision Pro, right? It has nothing to do. It's a VR headset, has nothing to do with this. But now sports is going to be heavily impacted because of now the technologies that are now available for the freaking headset is now going to enable new technologies to be able to use inside the venue. Now the inside the venue is going to change, and now it's going to be able to change how the impact on the sport is. And so players should not be turning a blind eye, and commissioners or whoever is involved with the actual playing of the game should not have a blind eye to what's happening right around the outside of it. Because even in automotive and headsets, they're all going to start impacting how the rest of it happens, and it's going to happen so fast because everybody is now clamoring, and all of these technologies are converging in a single multimodal experience, and it's coming.
Yeah, I think overall, I mean, that's the part that I know our team is so excited about in general, right? Yeah. Is that there's this new opportunity that if we start looking at what is defined as an experience and how do you create an experience versus how do you look at what is good audio technology versus visual technology and all these things, and you look at that as multimodal, like the whole idea that what is multimodal perception, how is our brain perceiving that moment, how do we actually believe that we're seeing that or experiencing that moment, it starts changing the narrative based off how quickly new technologies evolve. And we're now finally at that point in time where those questions are also not just being asked by the researchers that are looking at that, but are also being asked by the fan. And I think that's where there's such a unique time, is that if you want change, the change has to come from people demanding change. You cannot force change on a market, but if every fan says and gets a taste of what you can do, and that becomes the norm.
Yep.
And everybody is going to have to adjust to that as quickly as possible. And I think we're about to hit that era in sports, just seeing what's happening, where we're seeing renovation projects left and right in venues, but a lot of that is around the infrastructure, making it 5G, making sure there's electricity everywhere, making sure like the infrastructure is there to kind of hold these technologies. My overall concern though is that was thought and designed and planned before the momentum change and artificial intelligence and mixed reality has come into play. So what does the next generation of a venue experience look like?
Yeah.
I don't think anybody has a direct answer to that, but it's very fascinating of what technologies are going to be needed to actually make that come to life.
But to make a forecasting call, if you're making a venue, if you're developing and building out your venue right now, or if you're planning out your venue, do not skimp on your infrastructure. And I'm talking about data, signal, and power. Make sure you have that everywhere, because there's going to be not even our own solution, but there's other solutions that are going to take advantage of all that stuff. And you're going to find yourself at a loss very quickly. Even the brand new stadiums can easily get overwhelmed by the amount of direct connections that need to be at multiple places at once.
Yep. So I don't know. It's gonna be an interesting time, but look, I'm excited that we're in the conversation. I'm excited that we're working with different organizations to help solve for these problems. But ultimately, as a sports fan, I'm just excited to be able to consume sports in the way that I know that they could be consumed. So
we're not building the Matrix. Just have to reiterate
just yet.
that.
Awesome. Well, appreciate the conversation. That's a good Gigabytes episode for today.
Thanks, everyone.